This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
Dead witnesses, shaky evidence, and the ghosts in the case. It's hard enough to prosecute a poisoning case. It's harder when the key witness is dead. Now, the case of Kouri Richins, 2 people are gone. The alleged victim and the alleged drug dealer who could have connected the dots between her and the fentanyl that killed her husband. That's not just tragic, that's trial-altering. In this segment, we're going to dig into the prosecution's claim that Kouri didn't just kill her husband once. She may have tried it before. The now infamous fentanyl sandwich, as Eric Faddis calls it, is the center of the attempted poisoning allegation, at least the original one. But without toxicology, without direct evidence, and without Eric Richins to testify that he felt drugged that day, how do you prove what went on in a sandwich? And then there's the second missing witness, the supposed drug supplier, dead. No cross-exam, no testimony, no fingerprints, and the story. That's not the prosecution's fault, but it's the defense's advantage, because without living, testifying human beings to tie Kouri to the drugs and the pattern of behavior, the whole side of the case gets a lot murkier. We also revisit the jailhouse letter, the so-called walk the dog note, allegedly instructing her family to say Eric had a drug problem. The defense says it's a draft for a fictional book. The prosecution says it's witness tampering. And the jury, they're going to have to decide whether it's creative writing or consciousness of guilt. This is the part of the case where everything starts to feel like it's floating. Secondhand statements, circumstantial theories, and a lot of people who aren't around to fill in the blanks. It raises a critical question. What's stronger, the evidence or the suspicion? Let's get into it. Here's my continued conversation with Eric Faddis. How difficult is this going to be to prove the other attempted poisoning, though? I know that's the allegation. He's dead. He's not going to be around to really prove it. I wouldn't be surprised if she attempted to poison a sandwich with fentanyl. I imagine you just powder it out and you just kind of sprinkle it on there like salt. How do you prove that? I mean, it's a lot of hearsay. It's a lot of, there's not exactly a toxicology on this one to say that it actually happened.
Exactly. And these poisoning cases are often circumstantial like that. And so it can be really difficult. You don't have, some witness who was standing next to her while she's making the sandwich and sprinkling the fentanyl on allegedly. Mm-hmm. So you don't have that. You do have testimony about Eric Richins getting sick after eating that sandwich. In fact, I believe he even tells somebody, I think my wife drugged me. He takes this very long sleep, like an abnormal amount of time sleeping, and then comes back to life, thank heavens. But yeah, what is the jury going to infer from that? Certainly there are suspicious circumstances, but could that have, be chalked up to some other kind of illness or some condition that Eric Richins had? Or if you're Kouri Richins, she's essentially saying Eric Richins had a drug problem that was ongoing. And so it's going to be a little bit difficult to disprove some kind of drug problem in this case.
If he has the drug problem, why is she buying it for him? Why is she the one with the hookup? Why is she with the connection to the now deceased dealer? And let's talk about that aspect of it a little bit. She's got the connection. She's the one doing the dealing. She's the one doing the searches about dying on fentanyl, which I guess could be spun. And one would be she's a scared spouse. She is fearful that he's going to take too much, so she is making these searches just to see how much, if he took this, what could possibly happen. That's what's going on. That could be the argument. But let's talk about the dealer, who is also dead now. How is that going to affect the strength of the state's case?
That becomes a problem in these cases when witnesses die. It's an unfortunate reality of the court system. Not only do you not have Eric Richins, the victim, to testify about the alleged prior drugging and the ongoing financial issues and really the close internal dynamics of that relationship, but now you have the alleged supplier of the lethal dose of poison, who is also not going to be testifying, who you can't cross-examine that person. And in fact, some of that person's prior statements are probably not coming into evidence because they're hearsay and it's not some kind of dying declaration or something. So, little by little, the prosecution's case is sort of getting whittled down through no fault of their own. But these become real problems at the trial phase.
What do we know about the death of the dealer? I honestly don't know much about that angle of it. What do you know anything about what happened there?
I'm not aware of the precise
Uh-huh.
details of it. Just that there are now at least two deaths in this ongoing saga with Kouri Richins. Just it seems like people that she's around just happened to die. I don't think there's any allegation that Kouri Richins had something
Yeah.
to do with that, but certainly adds a layer of mystery and intrigue and suspicion when the person who would testify against you in a murder case turns up dead.
It's always interesting when that happens, isn't it? It seems. I mean, look, people die. Sometimes it just happens, and it can be very inconvenient. But does raise an eyebrow, especially from someone who's writing jailhouse letters to others about the case and trying to get blocks to be in the pattern that she wants them to be in. So she doesn't get convicted. Let's talk about this angle of it. Those letters, 6-page handwritten letter, allegedly written from Kouri to her mother, instructing her on how to walk the dog. Which is an interesting choice of terms to begin with, and create testimony claiming that Eric himself had a drug problem. Prosecutors filed it publicly as evidence and attempted to get it in there as witness tampering. The defense argues it was a draft of a fictional book. We've talked about this a while back. A fictional book. Wasn't very
That book
long.
sounds like it sucks.
It would suck. But there's a lot of crappy books out there that, I noticed that. I was thinking that the other day. I was in an antique store and there was a wall of books and a wall of movies. And I'm just like, look at all these books and all the time and effort that so many people put into each and every one of these. And how you look at them and go, I have no idea what this is. and nobody else does either. And no one else will ever see it. So I would imagine this book that she's writing probably would be in that pattern of ending up in an antique store within a couple months. That whole story of she's writing this book, is that one that you think they're going to take to the jury? Because on its surface, it just looks like utter bullshit.
Sure, when you're presenting arguments to a jury, you don't want to lose your own credibility.
No.
The jury is looking to the lawyers on both sides and saying, "Hey, who can I trust? Can I really believe this person when they're telling me that this is the case?" And so you got to think about that. And then we've seen this too in with rappers who have been charged. They'll cite to music lyrics, and the rapper said, "Oh, hey, that's just a song. That's just, that's not reality. It's all fiction." And so it's kind of been a pretty common defense for artists and faux artists to utilize when they are accused of something like this and they have some kind of work that appears suspiciously to be tied to the allegations.
Yeah, she ain't no rapper. She's not penning "Hit 'Em Up" or anything like that. It's not that. But hey, points for creativity, very much so. This is also something that could be looked at as consciousness of guilt. And how should a defense attorney respond to that? And how is the prosecution going to try and frame it?
It was interesting. So it reminds me of the James Craig case, the Colorado dentist who poisoned his wife. After he was incarcerated, he wrote several letters. His were soliciting the murder of the lead detective and trying to fabricate evidence in his own defense. And so how they styled it in that case, the defense, I thought, did a fine job of trying to explain it by saying, hey, he was a broken man at that time. He was desperate. He's in a box. He's facing a murder charge that he claims he didn't do. He had to take desperate measures to try and protect himself. And I think that perhaps could be the way defense tries to explain it away in the Kouri Richins case, just by saying, she didn't know what else to do. She was wrongly accused. And what else do? You try to better your situation. You go to your mom and see what help you can get. So that might be the way defense looks at it. The way prosecution's going to look at it is saying, hey, this is consciousness of guilt. She knew that the end of the road was coming, and she had to commit more crimes in order to cover up the first one.
And that's that when I look at that, it's following a pattern, because these narcissistic monsters out there, allegedly, if she is the one that did this, they do the same shit, and they all think they're just as genius every time they do it. Oh, we're gonna do all these things to make it look like I'm this grieving person. This is so horrible. She wrote a book, but it's for the kids, to help them deal with grief. And look at me, I'm just this. I mean, that was her initial angle, and then you got this. You got the letters. You got everything else, and it's a ruse. It's always seemingly something to shift the blame, shift the angle somewhere else, rather than taking any sort of responsibility. And they seem to think that no one will be the wiser, no matter how absurd their claims and actions are. It's almost like they're completely tone deaf to what they're throwing out there, or blind to it. I mean, do you see that in individuals that kind of fit this sort of personality profile that we have now witnessed of Kouri Richins?
I mean, absolutely. And oddly, I've seen it in multiple poisoning cases where the accused is just audacious, and they have this confidence, likely kind of a misplaced confidence, where they think they're untouchable. They can get away with anything. They're the orchestrator behind the scenes. They're smarter than everybody, they're going to be just fine. But when the light of day is shown upon these actions, like you said, a layperson looks at that and says, gosh, that looks like you're trying to cover up the murder of your husband. It doesn't look like you're writing some ridiculous, shitty book that happens to reference your mother or something. And they just don't see it. They don't get it.
Do you think that this should still stay in Summit County? Can they produce a fair jury in this case? I mean, nationally, this case has been silent for a little while because there just hasn't been a ton going on with it. But, locally, it's a big deal. A lot of people are paying very close attention to this. I mean, is a change of venue a better option in the interest of not having possible issues that could come up on appeal?
It very well could be. And one of the reasons is because, this isn't some massive county. It's not Denver County where I practice. It's not New York or Los Angeles or something like that. Summit County is rather small. And so there is an increased concern that those folks have been sort of saturated with media coverage and perhaps have drawn conclusions of their own already. And so why not just avoid that risk by transferring it to some outside county? It's not a terribly difficult process. It's not, doesn't require a ton of legwork. It's really just, hey, now the case is in this county and we're going to proceed as we have been. That eliminates that risk. It seems like a safe bet.
It's delayed till 2026 now. I mean, let's talk about time on this. I mean, how do you feel that this could benefit or hurt either side?
Well, one kind of old adage is that delay is a friend of the defense. That's not how I see it, but that's how some defense practitioners see it. And look at this case alone. As time has gone by, the alleged drug supplier is now dead. As time goes by, witnesses fall off, they move, they die, they change their minds. People's recollection begins to become eroded. Pieces of evidence become eroded. And so, I think Kouri Richins, as uncomfortable as it might be waiting this out, legally, it's in her best interest because things can go south. New prosecutors get on cases. There are all sorts of changes that could behoove the defense.
There's a lot of things that could certainly happen, including the possibility, like we saw in the Brian Kohberger case, of a plea deal coming forward. It could be run out in that way as well. It could get really close to this, and it could look really damning. And it may be one of those come to Jesus moments where the attorney's like, you might want to take a plea. Should we go to them? Should we say, we'll do this? Or do you want to end up over here in prison for the rest of your life? Or, either way. Do you think we're going to see a plea deal at some point in this case? There is a lot of strong evidence. Or with this character here, the Kouri Richins, the narcissist, she's far more like a James Craig, I think, than a Brian Kohberger in terms of ego and misguided grit. Do you see a plea deal in the future here, or is this thing going to go to trial in 26?
Well, I can tell you, Tony, having those come to Jesus talks with your client as a defense attorney is tough. It can be uncomfortable, unpleasant at times, especially when you take into consideration sort of the personality of the client and the person accused of murder. Like you said, sometimes there's an ego involved. There can be this sort of misplaced confidence where they don't see it like you do. They don't see the legal reality of it. However, as we get closer and as the prosecution has piled on these charges, that gives the prosecution additional leverage. That puts the defense in a more compromising position and more likely to at least explore the possibility of a plea. And I think her attorneys would be remiss if they didn't at least consider it.
When the case becomes a ghost story, what happens? What happens to the voices you need to hear that are gone? That is the challenge prosecutors now face in the Kouri Richins case. Eric Richins is dead. The alleged dealer is dead. And what's left behind the fragments? Testimony about symptoms, a buried text message, a sketchy letter, and a jailhouse law book. It's enough to convict someone? Is that enough to convict someone of murder? That's the question. Maybe, but it's not a clean narrative. That's exactly where reasonable doubt begins to form. What Eric Faddis understood here, whether intentionally or not, is the fragility of prosecution when its evidence relies too heavily on people who can no longer testify. Sure, the prosecution can say Eric thought he was drugged. Kouri searched lethal dose of fentanyl. The dealer was found dead. But in court, you don't convict on coincidence. You need someone to connect those dots. You need a human voice to say, yes, that's what happened. And that's why this letter, the one the defense says is fiction, is so crucial, because it's the closest thing left to a live voice. But it's also the slipperiest. Was it narrative building, panic, or just a bad creative writing exercise dressed up as conspiracy? Either way, it may become the psychological centerpiece of this case, especially if jurors begin seeing a pattern of manipulation rather than hard evidence. And then there's the looming trial date pushed to 2026. That delay doesn't just buy the defense time. It increases the odds that more witnesses vanish, memories erode, or new plea deals take shape. Because, as Faddis noted, justice isn't always about who's right. It's about who still shows up. And right now, fewer people are. At its core, this case is turning into a war between what can be proven and what can't be disproven. And that's where verdicts become unpredictable. More on the road ahead, and the courtroom chess match still to come. Stay with us and press subscribe wherever you download podcasts so you don't miss any of our reporting on this case. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not there already, just search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. You can do the same on any podcast platform and find us there. Until next time, I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.